Well, Dimitri O'Donnell is a correspondent for Telesur in La Paz, Bolivia. He joins us now live with more on that story. Dimitri, the people suspected of torturing and kidnapping Illanes are supposed to be the very people his government actually stands for. So why would they turn on one of their own?
Well, for a very good reason, according to them, and that's because the government is changing mining legislation here in La Paz, at the seat of the government. They've basically decided to break up the way that the cooperatives run their business. Up until now, since Evo Morales took office in 2006, the cooperative miners were allowed to conduct their own business deals with transnational companies. And in a recently changed law, which came into effect in early August, the government said that is no longer going to be the case. You are going to abide like the private, like the public sector miners in Potosi, where they have to come under state regulation and state rule. And because of this, the cooperative miners, who made a very lucrative business out of these private deals with the transnational companies, decided to take their protests out onto the streets, blockading some main routes between La Paz and cities like Oruro and Cochabamba, and these have turned increasingly violent since August 10th. So it's a reaction to this government legislation, which is limiting their business, according to them.
Now, the resource sector was nationalized under Morales in order to redistribute the country's natural wealth. How has that fared over the last decade?
Pretty well, actually. Over the past decade, for example, extreme poverty has fallen by 38% to 17%. GDP has tripled from 2005 to 2009. We've seen less poverty, 2 million people less living in extreme poverty, according to the government report last week, than they were when Evo Morales took office in 2006. There have been huge improvements all over the social structures in Bolivia. But what you have seen this year, like never before, is more and more public sector workers taking to the streets in anger against the government because they feel they're not getting a fair share of state resources. So you've seen doctors and teachers, disabled citizens and nurses all taking to the streets in their tens of thousands because they say that the economy of Bolivia is one of the strongest performers in Latin America. It's due to grow by 5% this year. And while they say, yes, there have been lots of improvements really on the ground for the poorest and for the public sector workers, not a lot has changed.
So, Dimitri, does what the events of this week seem like a kind of disproportionately violent response to rather recent difficulty with the government?
Yes, it's extremely violent. Bolivia is known for its protests, but not like this. This death of Rodolfo Illanes, the Deputy Vice Minister in the Interior Ministry, has rocked the government to the core. They never imagined that the Mining Federation would go to such extreme measures to prove their point against the government. It's not only rocked the government, it's rocked all of the social movements in Bolivia, which were once traditionally, as your report outlined, the main supporters and backers of this leftist government. Evo Morales still enjoys huge public support, however. In a recent poll last week, 62% of the public said they still approved of his administration, they still approved of his government, and more than half, 56%, said they were happy with the general state of the country. That may have changed after today's death of Rodolfo Illanes, as he was brought into, his coffin was brought to the presidential palace to lie in state for 3 days of mourning. There were shouts of justice, justice, justice from members of the public. And inside the state rooms in the presidential palace in La Paz, there was an outpouring of grief. One mourner quietly held up a placard saying, "Justice for my friend Rodolfo." So we don't really know what's going to happen over the next 3 days. There's a pause in hostilities between the government and the Mining Federation. After that, it's anyone's guess about how this situation will continue, whether it will deteriorate or get better, but there's no talks on the table in the immediate future.
Okay, Dimitri O'Donnell, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing your insight from La Paz.